So it's time to turn our attention to Cascading Style Sheets, or CSS. And right now I have my index.html file open in my Atom editor. And in my web browser I have the same file open. And we want to start playing with CSS a little bit. But first of all, let's get rid of these horizontal rules because they're just going to get in the way for a little while. And I'll get rid of the same one down here. And I will now also get rid of these BR tags, just for fun, okay? So let's go back, reload the page, and see what it looks like. And I'm tired of looking at that thing posting, so I'm just going to click here, do that, and now I can reload without the post. Okay, perfect. So this is what it looks like. And next thing I'll do is, just to make this a little bit cleaner, I'll get rid of all that extra text I put up in this TD tag, and just change it to username. And password I'll leave alone to just password. Let's go have a look at that. That looks about right. Good. Now I want to use some cascading style sheets to begin to change the way that this information appears on the screen. And let's just admit right now that for the next few minutes we're going to be making things singularly ugly. And we're doing that just to illustrate how CSS works. So let's go back to our Atom editor and think about what I want to do first. Here's where my form begins. And I, first of all, just above that, have login. Maybe I want to change the color of that login from its default black to red. Well, how can I do that? Well, here's where we turn our attention back to the head part of our HTML file. And we haven't paid a lot of attention to this. All we've done so far is modify the title. So let's go up and click just past the title and give ourselves a couple of blank lines to work with. And up here I'm going to define something called a style. So I have an opening style tag, and of course it has to have a closing style tag. And in between these is where I'm going to define cascading style sheet rules. And I'm going to have these rules applied to different parts of my web page. Now what I want to affect, of course, is this heading. And that heading happens to be in an H1 tag. So I want to write a rule that applies to the H1 tag. And the way that CSS rules are written is you define the class or the HTML tag, whatever you're trying to affect goes first, then you have curly brace brackets. And I'm going to press return just to make this readable. And I'm going to define my very first CSS rule. And I'll call it color, red, semicolon. And that's the syntax for all CSS rules. You have the rule you're invoking, followed by a colon, followed by whatever rule you want to apply. So when I save this, let me just clean this up a bit. I save this, switch back to my web browser. What I want to have happen is the H1 tag on this page is going to change to red. So let's reload it and see what happens. And it does. It does exactly what I want. Perfect. But what if I had more than one H1 tag on the screen? Well, let me go down here past the input type equals submit, put a couple of returns in, and have another H1, second heading. So I save that. Now because at the very top of this page, I defined this rule to apply to all H1s, when I save this and switch back to my web browser and reload, I should see a second heading, also in red, and I do. But what if I want this heading to be in blue and this heading to be in red? How am I going to do that? Well, the way that you do that is pretty straightforward. Instead of applying the style to H1, I might define a custom style that I can selectively apply to whatever elements I want. So I'll leave that one as it is right now, just to illustrate a concept in a moment. And I'm going to define a custom class. And the way that custom CSS classes work is they start with a dot. So the name has to begin with dot. And the dot of this one is going to be, the name of this one is going to be blue heading, brace brackets, and color blue. Now think about what's about to happen here. I've got my H1 style, and that's going to affect both of the H1 tags on the page. The first one that says login, and the second one way down here that says second heading. How am I going to apply this style, blue heading, on this element H1? Well, I do that by giving that opening H1 tag an attribute called class. class equals, and then the name of the style without the dot, blue heading. Now, really, there's one thing that you need to understand about the way that CSS works. The most recently applied rule always takes precedence. Let's go back and reload the page, and I'll show you what I mean. What I want to have happen here is that this stays red, and this turns blue. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Let's reload the page and see it, and that's what it does. But there are really two rules being applied to this one. The default H1 rule, which says turn it red, and then another class that I applied as an attribute called blue heading that turns it blue. So CSS rules follow a certain kind of precedence. The last rule applied always takes effect and overrides any of the previous rules. And that's actually pretty straightforward, but it's also incredibly useful. When we begin using other people's CSS libraries, for example, when we get to Bootstrap in a few lectures, we'll be able to override certain elements of the default Bootstrap styling, and our CSS will remain relatively short. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. Okay, so let's see what else we can do here. Well, I've got that H1 class applied, turned red using my style sheet up here, but I haven't done anything with, say, username. Well, username is right here in the web browser. I want to apply some styling to that. Well, what could I do? Let's go back and look at the HTML. I could, if I wanted to, define another class for the TD and say I wanted to make this green. If I wanted to make that green, I could come up here and I could say, fine, no problem. I'll redefine the HTML style for TD to be color green. Now, if I do that, what's the problem with that? The problem is I have a lot of TDs down here, and all I really want to affect is username. But if I save this, switch back to my web browser, and reload, it changed both username and password. Well, I suppose I could, if I wanted to, create another custom one called black text, and make that color black, and then come down to my table tag where I want password to remain black and give that the class of black text. That'll work, but it's kind of awkward. When I reload it, it does exactly what I want, but it's kind of awkward. So let's not do that. Let's get rid of the TD class equals black text. Let's come up here and get rid of this black text style, and let's get rid of this definition for TD. And let's think about what I want to do. Back to my web browser. I want to leave this green and leave this black, but I don't want to have a whole lot of very confusing CSS rules. So let's go back here and think about what we can do. Let's just create another class called green text. Color green. And save that. And go down to our table, find the username that I want to be green, and I can put the class in here, but that's really not that readable. If I have a lot of information in this table cell, I may miss the fact that there's a class applied at the TD level. And all I really want to affect is the word username. So I can actually wrap this in another kind of HTML tag called a span. And I can give that span a class of green text. And then close that wherever I want the green to stop. And I want the colon to remain black for some reason, so I'll close my span right there. Now, a span is a tag that actually doesn't take, it really doesn't do anything. Let me give you an example. I'm going to cut class out of this and just leave the span there and go back and reload it. And because I took the class off, nothing really happens. So the span is there, but it appears not to do anything. But when I come back here and paste the class green text back in, save it, go back to my web browser and reload it, that does exactly what I want. All right, let's get rid of that green text class, and let's create another one. We'll create another class called, oh, I don't know, let's make it blue and underlined. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to change the name of this class from green text to blue underlined text, and it's good to have descriptive text names, or class names. The color, of course, is blue, and I'll give it another attribute, and the attribute is going to be text decoration, underline. So now, wherever I apply this class, blue underlined text, I have the color changing to blue, and I'm also going to underline anything that can be underlined. So let's go down here and find our password field, and apply a span of class equals blue underlined text. Close that, and then close the span. So, span. Save that, go back and reload the page, and hopefully this will be blue and underlined. And it is. That's exactly what I told it to do. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, what if I, just for the sake of argument, want to put a link down here? Well, p ahref equals, and this is a link, and I'll link it back to file2.html, and I'll call it this is a link, and close my A and close my P. What if I wanted to affect the way that the ahref tag looks? Well, let's first of all go back and see what the default looks like. So I come back here, reload the page, and there it is. This is a link. What if I wanted to remove the underlining for that? Can I do that? Well, let's try to figure that out. Back I go to my CSS rules, and I'm going to say, define a class called link no underline. Text decoration equal or colon none. No text decoration. So then I go down to find my ahref, and I give this a class. Class equals, and what did I call it? I called it link no underline. Link no underline. Save that. Now, what should happen when I go back and reload this page is this should remain a link, but it should have no underline, if we've guessed right. Reload, and it does exactly that. But when I roll over it, no underlining, no underlining. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. So let's now go back and just make one more change to this thing. Let's instead make this second heading. Let's change it to this is another heading in all caps. I've done that for a reason, okay? It's currently got the class blue heading assigned to it, and that's it. So with no changes, if I save this and go back, we should have a new heading descriptor here, all in uppercase letters. And we do. That's exactly what I expected to happen. No surprises there. But if I go back and I modify this CSS style, the one that says blue heading, I want to make all the letters lowercase. How might I do that? Well, there's got to be some way of doing that. And in fact, there is. It's a pretty simple rule. It's called text transform, colon, space. And you'll notice that Adam gives us a bunch of options which actually exist as part of the rules. So if I wanted it to be all lowercase, chances are this is the rule that I want, lowercase. So let's see if that works. Save, go back to our web browser, reload it, and this is exactly what I want. That works the way that I want it to. Okay, so that's our brief introduction to CSS. In the next lecture, we'll move on and do some more interesting things.